November 20th, 1971. The Cairngorm Plateau, Scotland. 6 young people froze to death in the snow, 500 yards from an emergency shelter that was buried before they ever went looking for it. A chairlift carried tourists to a restaurant near the summit. The plateau beyond was an easy walk. Easy was the reputation. Easy is why a school trip went up. It was never a tourist mountain, not one mistake, a chain. Welcome to Tourist Tragedies. Start with what the Cairngorms had become by 1971, because it explains almost everything that follows. In 1960, the ground between Aviemore and Cairngorm was opened up for skiing. A road was pushed to about 650 meters in Coir Cass. A ski center went in, then lifts and tows, and one chairlift carried you the whole way to a new restaurant called the Ptarmigan at 1,080 meters. Roughly 3,500 feet, reach sitting down, in whatever you happened to be wearing that morning. From the door of that restaurant, in decent weather, walking out onto the plateau was easy. And it was not an unsupervised place either. Glenmore Lodge sat down beside Loch Morlich, Scotland's national outdoor training centre, with instructors on site who could turn out for a mountain emergency. Edinburgh's Education Authority ran its own outdoor centre nearby. Mountain rescue teams covered the range. There were even small shelters scattered across the high ground. On paper, this was the most supported mountain range in Britain. Here is the part that bothers me with this story. Every single thing I have just described made the plateau feel safer. Almost none of it made the plateau safer. Because the ground above that chairlift is not really a British mountain, it is a granite plateau sitting at around 1,200 meters, with a subarctic climate and thin tundra vegetation. And the naturalist Adam Watson, who knew that ground better than almost anyone alive, described it as closer to the Arctic of Canada or Norway than to the Alps. Snow can fall up there in any month of the year. And the wind is not ordinary wind. In March 1986, the weather station on the summit of Cairngorm recorded a gust of 173 miles per hour. That is not a gale. That is a Formula One car at full speed on a straight, arriving sideways, carrying gravel. Not a hill, not a walk. An Arctic plateau with a restaurant parked on the edge of it. And out in the middle of it, somebody had built a shelter. So, how does an emergency refuge end up in the single worst place you could possibly put one? Very simple. Somebody built it, and nobody stopped them. At some point in the 1960s, a military group put up 3 small shelters on the high Cairngorms without permission from the local authorities. They were called St. Valery, El Alamein, and Curran. The accounts of exactly who built them and why have never fully agreed. One version has apprentices from a shore base at Rosyth, putting them up as a memorial to the 51st Highland Division. Another has the Curran shelter going up at the request of a local mountain rescue association. What every account agrees on is the decade and the fact that nobody with authority over that ground signed anything. Curran was the one that mattered. A metal box covered over with boulders with a floor about 4 meters by 2. Call it a garden shed. It sat beside Lagganlia, the highest standing water anywhere in Britain, right out in the open middle of the plateau. And this next detail decides the entire story. Adam Watson, together with the Mountain Rescue Committee of Scotland, wrote to the Nature Conservancy about it. Their argument was not complicated. A shelter marked on the map in the middle of that plateau would draw inexperienced walkers onto that plateau. It would pull people across the most dangerous ground in Britain by promising them a roof at the end of the walk. Nothing was done about the matter. There was a second problem, and it is almost too neat. The shelters could vanish. Snow drifted over them, and we know exactly how completely because somebody photographed it. In early March 1972, 4 months after this story, the Curran shelter lay under roughly 7 feet of snow, with only its ventilator showing. In early June, it still had about 4 feet on it. The door could not be opened until Midsummer Day. Sit with that for a second. For a good part of every winter, the emergency shelter was invisible. By November 1971, Curran had been up there for years, marked on the map, known to everyone. and written into the plan of a school trip from Edinburgh as the place to run to if the weather turned. For most of a decade, none of it mattered, because for most of a decade, nothing went badly wrong. This was the high tide of British school adventure. The idea was that you took ordinary teenagers out of an ordinary city, put them on a hill, and gave them something no classroom could. Edinburgh's education authority believed in it enough to run its own centre for it at Lagganlia in Kincraig, with a resident principal named John Paisley, age 39, who had the authority to forbid any expedition he did not like the look of. Ainslie Park School, in the north of Edinburgh, had a mountaineering club. In November 1971, the club went to Lagganlia for the weekend, and 14 pupils arrived at the center at about 10 o'clock on the Friday night. 3 young people were in charge of them. You need all 3 names, because 2 of the 3 do not come off that mountain the way they went up it. Ben Beattie was 23. He was Ainslie Park's chief permanent instructor in outdoor education. He held a mountain instructor certificate, and he had a fair amount of mountaineering behind him. What he did not have, and this is documented, was much experience of the Cairngorms in winter. Catherine Davidson was 20. Everyone called her Kathy. She was in her final year at Dunfermline College of Physical Education. She was Beattie's girlfriend, and the school had approved her to help run the mountaineering club. Less overall experience than Beattie, but she had been in the Cairngorms in winter twice, which was twice more than the third leader. Sheila Sunderland was 18. She had just started at Lagganlia as a volunteer trainee instructor on a 3-week placement, and she had never set foot in the Cairngorms in her life. She was going on this expedition partly to help, but mainly to learn. 18 years old, learning, on the highest ground in the country, in November. And then there were the children. Carol Bertram, 16, Susan Byrne, 15, Lorraine Dick, 15, Diane Dudgeon, 15, William Kerr, 15, and Raymond Leslie, also 15, the smallest pupil in the whole party. 6 teenagers from an Edinburgh comprehensive who had signed up for the School Hill Walking Club. Now, one thing that would matter enormously later, and that nobody thought about at all at the time, their parents did not know what this was. It came out at the inquiry. The consent form sent home did not say that winter mountaineering was involved. Only one parent had been told the outing was going to the Cairngorms at all. 40 years afterwards, Diane Dudgeon's father said he had understood the trip to be simply a stay at the Lagganlia Centre, and that he had no idea they were going to be climbing mountains. That is not a small administrative slip. That is the outermost layer of the safety system, the layer made of parents asking questions, and it had been quietly removed before anyone left Edinburgh. But on the Friday night, none of that existed. There was a minibus, a bunk room, 14 excited 15-year-olds, and a plan for Saturday that had already been approved. Saturday, November 20th, 1971. The plan was a 2-day navigational exercise. Cross the plateau from Cairngorm, south to Ben Macdui, drop down the far side to Correrbathy, low in the Lyrig Grue Valley, and spend the night there. On Sunday, the 2 groups would come home by different routes and meet transport at 4 in the afternoon. The bad weather alternative was written down as well. If conditions turned, cut out Ben Macdui and bivouac at the Curran shelter instead. John Paisley approved it. The party split in 2, as intended. Beattie took the older, stronger group. Kathy Davidson took the younger, weaker one, with Sheila Sunderland alongside her to gain experience. 3 details from that morning. Hold on to all 3. The first, they left Lagganlia between 10:30 and 11 o'clock, which is late. Sunset that day came just before 4 in the afternoon, so they had roughly 5 hours of usable light for a plateau crossing in November, and they were still sitting in a vehicle when the day started burning down. The second, there was already snow on the ground, and the forecast they had was for deteriorating weather with more snow coming. The third detail is the one that sounds irrelevant. At the car park, the plan was modified again, and rather than walk up, both groups took the chairlift to the top station and ate their packed lunches inside the Ptarmigan restaurant. warm room, hot drink, windows. Beattie left with 8 children, roughly 20 minutes ahead of Davidson and Sunderland with the other 6. Davidson's group climbed Cairngorm, and an instructor working at the radio station on the summit saw them there at about 1:15 in the afternoon. Shortly after that, he saw them heading out onto the plateau into worsening weather. That is the last time anyone outside the group sees them for 2 days. Beattie's group, out in front, hit rising wind and falling visibility in Cairngorm and had to start navigating on bearings. He made the call, switched to the bad weather plan, and turned for Curran. They dug the snow away from the shelter door and got inside at around 3:30. They had crossed the plateau safely. Behind them, out of sight, the second group was still walking. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what a Cairngorm whiteout actually is, because it is not fog and it is not simply heavy snow. Adam Watson described the conditions plainly. In a full plateau storm, it becomes suffocating and hard to breathe. It is hard to open your eyes. You cannot see anything beyond your own feet, and you cannot talk to the people you are with, except one at a time, by cupping a hand around somebody's ear and shouting directly into it. Now add the ground. The plateau is granite gravel and shattered rock, and it is flat. No ridge to follow, no valley wall on your left. No tree line, no fence, no path. In a whiteout up there, the entire visible world is a gray blank about a meter wide that travels with you. Which brings us to the shelter. Curran was a metal box roughly 4 meters by 2, low to the ground and frequently drifted over. Finding it in a whiteout is nothing like finding a road. A road is a line, and if you walk far enough in roughly the right direction, you will eventually cross it. Curran was a point. Miss it by 50 meters either side, and you do not find it late. You never find it at all, and worse, you have no way of knowing whether you have already walked past it. Then there is the snow itself, which does not behave the way most people picture it. You have probably heard that you can dig a snow hole and survive a night out. That is true when the snow is right. It has to be consolidated, packed hard enough to hold a roof over your head. Fresh, dry, wind-blown powder cannot do that. Dig into it, and it pours straight back in, like flour. On the plateau that Saturday, the snow was flowery, so both textbook options were already gone. They could not reliably find the shelter, and they could not build one. Kathy Davidson did not know either of those things when she walked out of the Ptarmigan. She was about to learn both of them inside the same hour. Quick heads up before this next part. Every week I drop new videos you won't find anywhere else. Please subscribe. Conditions in Cairngorm are already bad. Knee-deep snow. A strong wind out of the south-southeast. In the Faith Beattie Basin, it is worse. Davidson makes a decision. Rather than navigate blind toward a point she may never find, she takes the party downhill to the Faith Beattie stream. Follow the water up, and the water leads to Lochn Beattie. The Lochn sits right beside Curran. It is a sound idea. A line instead of a point. The stream is completely covered over by snow. Dusk is coming down now. She judges that hunting for the shelter will exhaust the children for nothing, and she decides to bivouac where they are. That decision is the disaster. She does not know that the ground she has chosen, the head of the Faith Beattie, is a major accumulation area for snow. It is one of the places on that plateau where the snow goes. They build a rough wall of snow and lie down behind it. They strip off most of their wet clothing, polythene bags, then sleeping bags. Through Saturday night, the weather worsens. The drifting snow starts to bury them. Some of them panic. Davidson digs at the drifts to pull them clear, over and over, and loses her mitts doing it. First light, Sunday. Raymond Leslie is completely buried. They can still hear him. 2 of the girls are lying on the surface, out of both their sleeping bags and their polythene bags. Another girl is described as being in a bit of a daze. Those 3 are already dying. Davidson gets the 2 uncovered girls back into bags. Then she and William Kerr, still strong, set off for help. Thigh-deep snow, wind straight into them. They get 25 yards and they turn back. All day Sunday they wait. Another girl is buried. After dark, they see the reflection of flares out on the hill, but their own flares are lost somewhere under the snow, and they cannot answer. At daybreak on Monday, Davidson and Kerr try once more. This time, the boy collapses. So, she goes alone. She crawls. Nobody knew. Beatty's group had assumed all night that Davidson had taken her party to a different shelter, and they only learned otherwise on Sunday evening. It was 7:25 that night before Aviemore Police Station was told that 8 people were missing. 3 two-man parties went out into the blizzard immediately. Conditions were so bad they could not even find the St. Valerie refuge. By Monday, 50 men were on the hill. An RAF Whirlwind out of Luchars was reduced to a hover in the pass and had to fly a 30-mile detour to get in at all. Out over the plateau, the crew's outside air temperature gauge read -10 Celsius, with the snow streaming past underneath them like a conveyor belt. At about 10:30, they spotted what they took to be a small red tent. The tent grew arms. It was Kathy Davidson, on her hands and knees, still crawling. Her hands were frozen solid. She could not walk, and she could not be carried. So the navigator climbed out and walked ahead of the helicopter, holding the winch wire, giving the pilot something to follow through the whiteout. She managed 3 words: burn, Locan, buried. Between 12:30 and 1:30, every one of them was found. Raymond Leslie was the last, under 4 feet of level snow, unconscious and badly frostbitten. He was still breathing. They flew him to Regmore Hospital, and he recovered. The other 6 did not. A fatal accident inquiry sat at Banff in February 1972 for 6 days, and the jury allocated no blame to anyone, which is not the same thing as finding no cause. When you lay the facts in sequence, a terrifying picture begins to form. 1. In the 1960s, a shelter goes up on the plateau without permission from anybody, and Adam Watson and the Mountain Rescue Committee of Scotland write to the Nature Conservancy warning that it will draw inexperienced people onto dangerous ground. Nothing is done. 2. An expedition is planned that John Duff, then leader of the Braemar Mountain Rescue Team, would later call appallingly overambitious for teenage children. He laid the blame not on one person, but on everybody who made and accepted those plans. It is approved anyway. 3. The party leaves late, on a day with snow already down and a forecast of worse, and spends part of the shortest kind of daylight riding a chairlift and eating lunch. 4. On ground where the snow will not hold a hole and the shelter cannot be found, the second group lies down in the open. Duff's judgment on that is worth hearing exactly. To attempt a winter bivouac in a storm on a Cairngorm's plateau is literally a life or death decision, and a last option. 5. Nobody raises the alarm for more than 24 hours because the first group assumed the second group was somewhere else. There is a name for this shape. It is called the Swiss cheese model. Every layer of a safety system has holes in it, and disaster happens on the day all the holes line up. But this one has a second name, and it is the more uncomfortable of the two. Risk compensation. A safety measure that changes behavior can make people attempt things they would never otherwise attempt. The Curran shelter is the reason that Route looks survivable in bad weather. That is what it did. It never sheltered them. It was the reason they were out there at all. Curran was demolished in 1975. 4 years after, it did the only thing it was ever really going to do. A week after the disaster, there was a memorial service at Innish Church near Lagganlia. The parents came, so did the helicopter crew who had pulled Kathy Davidson off the plateau. The winchman, Norman Pringle, was approached by the father of one of the girls. The man took Pringle's hand in both of his own and said, "Sorry you couldn't save my wee lassie." Outside, the snow had gone completely. Not just from the churchyard, from the mountains behind it. 6 people died because every small, invisible failure lined up perfectly for a disaster nobody thought was possible. So, here is my question for you. If a shelter makes people attempt something they otherwise never would, is it a shelter at all? Tell me in the comments.